reached freedom. Many millions of Ukrainians have stood up to their Russian attackers every single day. Their courage and their belief that their right to independence and a self-determined life in freedom must be defended is there, and it is a powerful force. These men and women fear for their lives every day. They fear for their loved ones, but they also fight for their country and their freedom every day. We Germans admire the courage, the strength and the will of the people of Ukraine, and we stand in solidarity with them. We are helping them to defend themselves. We share in the suffering of millions, and we mourn their dead. Honored guests, I would like to ask you to pause with me for a moment to remember the victims of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Please stand.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, war is back in Europe for the first time since the Second World War. In the midst of Europe, a campaign of conquest is unfolding. Russia denies Ukraine its right to exist. It wants to destroy Ukraine as an independent nation. The inviolability of borders, the sovereignty and self-determination of a country, human dignity and peace, respect for rules and the law. All this means nothing to Putin. Everything on which our coexistence in Europe is built does not count for anything with him. But it counts for something with us. Germany is not at war, but this war most certainly concerns us. Russia's attack has plunged us back into a time we thought we had left behind us. Russia's war of aggression has reduced the European security order to ashes. It is an attack on all the lessons that the world has learned from the two world wars. It is an attack on everything we too stand for. And that is what makes it the epochal shift we are currently experiencing. This new era, ladies and gentlemen, raises new questions. And in our search for answers, we can't find much in the past. We cannot find anything to draw on from the routines from the last decades. For the European Union, these have been decades of stability and growth, and this is what shaped our thinking and our actions. Today, we have to think differently, and we have to act differently. It goes without saying that we are providing financial and economic assistance for this country under attack, that more than 1 million Ukrainians have found refuge here with us. And I am grateful to all Germans, to everyone in our country, for having supported the victims of this war in such large numbers. They are supporting refugees from Ukraine. They help their twin cities, sister cities in Ukraine, and they will continue to do so. Think differently and acting differently in this new era also means that we now make decisions we would have maybe considered inconceivable a year or two ago. We are supplying weapons to a theater of war, heavy weapons, and we are providing Ukraine with unprecedented military support, with great effort and in all earnestness. And of course, each decision goes hand in hand with big, sometimes emotional debates. Some are concerned about escalation. Others would like to speed up decisions. But I know one thing for sure, ladies and gentlemen. The political decision makers sitting here in front of me, both in the government and in the opposition, are well aware of the great implications that each and every decision has. They make assessment and take decisions as part of their responsibility for our country, for our alliance, and for Ukraine. And I believe they deserve our trust and respect for that. Germany is now also in military terms the biggest supporter of Ukraine on the European continent. And despite all the controversial and sometimes heated debates, I am certain that we will continue to do that. So, Ambassador, I can tell you that also when we look at what is ahead of us, you can rely on Germany. Němečina, naději, sojušník. We have seen it last year. Our democracy is strong, much stronger than Putin imagined, and also stronger than we ourselves have perhaps sometimes believed. Putin is counting on Ukraine's allies becoming tired of the war at some point, that we will become jaded and look away from the horrors, which, of course, are horrors that are extremely difficult for us to bear as well. Ladies and gentlemen, we will not do him that favor. We will not do Putin that favor. Yes, our resolve and our unity will be needed for a long time to come. We are supporting Ukraine on its path towards the European Union, a path which is closely linked to the reconstruction of this war-torn country. And we know that in the long term, even after this war, Ukraine will need a strong defense and effective security guarantees. It will rely on these, and also for that, we are standing by your side, Ambassador Makeyev. Ukraine is fighting for its country, its freedom, its future in Europe. It is fighting against land grab and occupation. It is fighting for what every country in this world claims for itself, for what is actually required for just and lasting peace. Many people are longing for peace these times, in our country, around the world, but nowhere more than in Ukraine itself. Yet a sham peace, which simply rewards Putin's land grab, and leaves people at the mercy of the arbitrary actions of their occupiers, is not a real peace. An overwhelming majority of the states in the United Nations reaffirmed yesterday that if peace is to be established, it must be a just and lasting peace. We very much welcome any constructive proposal bringing us closer to fair and just peace. Whether the global power of China would like to play such a constructive role remains to be seen. If that is the case, then China should talk not only with Moscow, but also with Kiev. If that is the case, China should join the overwhelming majority of states under the roof of the United Nations and stand up for peace. And if that is the case, that means that together we need to hold high the principles of the United Nations where they are breached on a daily basis. It is Russia that has brutally attacked its neighboring country. It is Russia that keeps sending new troops to the front. It is not the defense support from the West that is prolonging the war. It is Russia. It is not Ukraine nor its allies that are an obstacle to peace. It is Russia. Putin knows very well what needs to be done if he genuinely wanted the war to end. Only when Russian troops withdraw, a path towards negotiation can be open, and that is what the United Nations resolution of yesterday calls for. Ladies and gentlemen, it must be made clear to Russia that there cannot be a victory in its criminal war. Putin wants victory. He wants victory by all means, but the truth is, anyone who orders murder and killings, who orders Ukraine to be destroyed by bombs, cities to be devastated, and children to be abducted, who allows their own soldiers to senselessly bleed to death day after day, will never go down in history as a victor. They have already lost. Ladies and gentlemen, you will all have seen the photos in the gallery when you entered this room. The ruins of a flat in Kharkiv, the ruins of a house in the Donbass, which once was home to the people who lived there. A little boy at his mother's grave in Bucha. And you might also have seen the last, a central photo in this exhibition. It portrays a soldier in a village near Kherson with his arms around a woman. The two of them are simply glad to see that the other one is alive. They feel exhausted but liberated. Here we can catch a brief glimpse of peace. And I hope that we will soon see many pictures like this one. Thank you very much.
You're watching DW News. This is Pablo Folilias taking over from my colleague Sarah Kelly, where the German President, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, has just spoken at Bellevue Palace here in Berlin, where they are commemorating. There's a ceremony to mark that awful one-year anniversary of Russia's war in Ukraine. He was speaking in front of many members of the German Parliament and of the German government, including the Chancellor Olaf Scholz and the Ukrainian ambassador to Germany. OK, we're actually now going to cross over to listen in to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy now.
Last 2 decades turned into something that needs to be fought for. Diplomacy did not work. The existing security architecture of the world failed. The old European hope that economic relations could stop Russian tanks did not work. But something did work indeed. Unity, the unity of Ukraine, Germany, and the free world as a whole, and the resolve to defend the foundations of our coexistence. On Ukrainian soil, we are fighting for something without which you, dear friends, could not fathom and envisage your own life. It's security, basic security, freedom, and laws, human dignity, and the right of each and every human being and each community to be respected, the blessing to live in a family, and the opportunity to dream of a safe and secure future for their own children. It's the simple things. 1,877 Ukrainian cities and villages are denied of this opportunity. The Russian invaders want to add more of the destinies of millions. In our city that was invaded and occupied by Russians in Mariupol, there are no intact buildings anymore. Russia did everything to kill everyone there. We almost had 1.5 million people living in Mariupol. Mariupol is destroyed up to 90%. The remains, the ruins of buildings that were burned down and destroyed by Russians are being destroyed and done away with. The rubble is done away with. And these ruins are turned into rubble that is to be used for the construction of new roads. We need to do everything in our power to not allow Russia to occupy Ukraine and our neighbors and turn our cities into rubble. Do we have the resolve and the power? Yes, we are indeed to do so. We're in unity. We stand together. We are capable to end the Russian aggression this year. From the very beginning, the first minutes of the Russian invasion, Germany stood by our side. Germany helps us to protect Ukraine from Russian terror. And Germany will be on our side on the day of victory and on the day of freedom. Germany will stand by our side when we rescue our cities from Russian terror. Mr. President, Mr. Chancellor, German people, today, now is the time to restore peace with our courage and with our weapons, and to create a security for all. No one will attack us anymore. No one will attack freedom if he knows that the free world is resolved enough to defend this freedom. No one will repeat the 24th of February of last year if he knows that on the whole of territory of Ukraine there is no more aggressor, no more occupier. We can make sure that this happens together with you, together with everyone around the world who value life. I thank you for your support. I thank you for standing by our side this past year. Thank you, Mr. Federal President. Thank you, Olaf, for your confidence and trust in Ukraine, in our citizens, and in our shared values of a free, united, and peaceful Europe. Glory to those who fight for freedom. Slava Ukraina. Glory to Ukraine.
All right, this is DW News. We've just heard there from the Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, who was addressing Germany, and he had a very clear message for all those senior members of the German government and the German president who were gathered at the Bellevue Palace here in Berlin. He said thank you to Germany. He said thank you for your support and your confidence. He said that Germany has stood by Ukraine's side. And he posed the question, do we have the resolve to defeat the Russian forces? He said, yes, we are capable. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go over to my colleague at Bellevue Palace here in Berlin, DW political correspondent Hans Brandt, who has been standing by patiently for us in the cold and listening to the German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Hans, you followed the speech. Tell us your thoughts on both the German president and also the Ukrainian President Zelenskyy.
Well, I think what's noticeable in the way Frank-Walter Steinmeier, the German president, speaks about the situation in Ukraine is the very emotional and personal manner that he chose. In the palace behind me, there's an exhibition of photographs from Ukraine, showing the suffering of the Ukrainian people. Frank-Walter Steinmeier himself spoke about his visit to Ukraine and having seen a particular village that was largely destroyed by Ukraine, a village of no military significance. He spoke very emotionally also to the Ukrainian people in expressing his support and Germany's support for their attempt to defend their freedom. So the emotional way that he speaks is in contrast to some of the statements you often see, for instance, from the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who was also in attendance. The whole event here today is at the highest possible level of German support for Ukraine in terms of protocol, in terms of symbolism. There's the Ukrainian flag in the air behind me in front of this palace, the seat of the president. There are all the top representatives of the German state in attendance, including the President of Parliament and the President of both chambers of Parliament, I should say, and Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor, as well. So all of this is an extremely strong expression of German solidarity and German support for Ukraine.
Hans, tell us...
As far as Zelenskyy was...
Go ahead. I was going to ask you about Zelenskyy, and you just started there.
Yes, indeed. Zelensky's speech as well, I think it showed that the strength of this relationship between Germany and Ukraine, which one has to say did not start off well somewhere around a year ago when Germany was very hesitant initially about what to do exactly in supporting Ukraine. And in fact, there was that occasion when Frank-Walter Steinmeier, the president, was going to go to Ukraine, going to go to Kiev, and then was disinvited at very short notice, which caused quite a disturbance in the relationship between the two countries and between the two presidents. I think that disturbance appears now to have been overcome. There is a close coordination, a close relationship between the two countries and the presidents, and that was evident from Zelenskyy's speech. Zelenskyy, in his speech, did say that peace would only come through defense, through weapons deliveries, in a sense, through, how should we say, through fighting. So his stance was very strong in trying to say what Ukraine needs now from Germany and from the Western world, from its supporters, is further military aid, further aid to help it defend against Russian aggression.
Hans, I want to ask you something as well about what the German President, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, said. He said, we have to think differently and act differently. Let's talk a little bit about, you touched on it there, Germany's, let's say, change in approach compared to a year ago. Because we really have seen a pretty huge shift, right?
Absolutely, yes. I think one has to look at Germany's history here. The history of the Second World War is what I mean. During that war, it was Germany who was the aggressor, Germany that brought war to the whole of Europe and one could say to the whole of the world. And this history has always meant that modern Germany, post-war Germany, has been a Germany that wants to promote peace, that wants to avoid conflict, that does not want to get involved in conflict, that in fact had laws that prohibited German troops from being deployed beyond the German territory. So the situation that we are in now, where Germany is supplying weapons, where Germany into a war zone, where Germany is in a sense at a distance participating in defending, in helping defend against an aggressor, is a very new situation for Germany, and it required a lot of new thinking, as Frank-Walter Steinmeier was saying, a lot of rethinking Germany's position as well. And that is still going on. It is not completed yet. Germany has not yet, I think one can say, found its new role within Europe and in this new situation.
Thanks, Hans. Hans Brandt, DW political correspondent outside Bellevue Palace here in Berlin. Well, you're watching DW News and special coverage marking the day 1 year ago when Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine began. Now, earlier today, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy addressed members of the military in a ceremony in Kyiv. He thanked those involved in defending the country and later awarded medals to serving soldiers and families of those who lost their lives in the line of duty. Let's take a listen.
I thank everyone who persevered through that February, that whole year, and who made Ukraine unbreakable. Glory to everyone who is currently in combat. Glory to the Ukrainian armed forces, the National Guard, the intelligence services, border guards, and everyone in the defense and security forces.
Well, for the view from the Ukrainian capital, let's cross to DW's Fanny Fashar, who's standing by for us in Kyiv. Fanny, great to see you. It's an incredibly somber day, I imagine, in Kyiv. Tell us more about what's been happening there today.
It's a very, very difficult day, Pablo, because even if people wouldn't want to remember that day, obviously with all the attention and all the, be it from media, but also all the reactions worldwide to this day, makes people to reflect on this anniversary. Even so many told us they just would like to go on with today and just get it over with, because it's just really difficult. It's a day of mourning to so many. In fact, we have just heard their President Zelenskyy speaking. He was honoring those fallen soldiers, but also their families. He gave a medal to a mother who lost both her son and her husband, who said she's on her own now. She had to bury 2 family members, and she just hopes that this is not going to happen, has to happen ever again. So yes, it is a very difficult day for people here, but some actually take a little bit of strength in the fact that that day, February 24th, last year, when this full-scale invasion began and Russia wanted to take over Kyiv, wanted to take over the government and basically install some sort of a puppet state, that did not happen. The attempt failed, also failed when it comes to other parts of Ukraine, and they're just really hoping that there's not going to be another anniversary, that this country is going to return to where it was which is a peaceful country, a country that deserves to be sovereign, they say, that deserves to be independent, and that this aggression and this attempt by Russia to take over control here is going to stop. It's a day really for people here in Ukraine where they hope that there's not going to be an attack by Russia, not just today, but in the days ahead. But this is exactly, of course, something that's unfortunately not going to be the case, because already we are hearing massive attacks there in eastern Ukraine, not just in and around Bakhmut, but so many villages and towns that are at that long 1,000-kilometer front line in the east and south.
Fanny, it's been a very long year, to say the least, I imagine, for Ukrainians. You've been in Ukraine a considerable amount of time in this past year. Tell us, what is it that has really surprised you from your time there?
We hear this adjective, this description of Ukrainians so often, that they are defiant. And I have to say, when I experienced that very first day here, actually, at Maidan on February 24th, and I saw people leaving, but I also saw people staying on, and they kept staying on, actually, in this country, and want to show with their presence that they're resilient. And even the ones who left, they're trying to support their home country, be it with humanitarian aid or with anything that they can, to, by that, sort of contribute on their own way, making sure that Ukraine remains Ukraine, an independent country. Probably this is something that surprised me the most, that in other parts of the world where there were conflicts and wars and people backed down and they didn't return. Here in Kiev, people have returned really just a few months after the first phase of the war, and they were really eager to rebuild parts of Kiev region, Bucha, for example, that's been so heavily shelled in the past. So what really surprised me as well was this resilience and also this feeling of not giving in, not giving up, and making sure that their country remains theirs. Apart from also this emotion that even in the most devastated places, I found people smiling because they don't want to give Russia, they told me, this sense of that they can be destroyed, that their emotions and their positive outlook on life can be destroyed. Something that I find quite impressive, while at the same time, of course, we shall not forget that this is a day where a lot of people are mourning, and a lot of people are very much traumatized here 1 year after the beginning of this full-scale invasion by Russia.
Thanks, Fanny. DW correspondent Fanny Fashar in Kyiv for us. Right, well now, after a year of war, there's no sign of either side slowing down, yet even Ukraine's staunch ally, the United States, has said the war cannot be won by military means, and it's urged diplomacy. So what does the past year tell us about how the conflict will continue into the future, or how it might end?
1 year of constant fighting. A new Russian offensive already underway. Will the two sides ever sit down and make a deal? There have been several rounds of talks, but both sides have blamed the other for negotiating in bad faith. The two sides did come together in a deal to allow grain to be exported from Ukraine's ports, but the agreement only happened under immense international diplomatic pressure, with a hunger crisis looming in many parts of the world. The relationship between Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelenskyy makes the prospects for peace even more remote. Putin describes the Ukrainian government as fascist and neo-Nazi. Zelenskyy has said that he's ready for dialogue with Russia, but not while Putin is in power. Russia is unlikely to subdue Ukrainians, who see the war as an existential battle. But if Ukraine runs too low on ammunition or soldiers, it will be difficult to resist Russia's overwhelming superiority in numbers. Analysts say Putin sees conquering Ukraine as his legacy, restoring Russia's status as an imperial power. He's staked so much on the war he can't afford to lose face by backing down. But if enough Russian soldiers die, he may face domestic backlash and change his calculations. That means the conflict has settled into a contest to see which country can stand more pain. with Russia now losing hundreds or even thousands of soldiers every week, and Ukrainians suffering through an invasion that has driven many from their homes and destroyed much of the country. Early this year, Russia said no diplomatic solution was in sight, and both sides have big plans to take territory. Any solution seems months away at the very least.
Well, a year into the war, Ukraine and the West prepare for the biggest reconstruction since World War II. We have more now with business news, and Janelle Dumalaun is here to bring you all that.
Thank you, Pablo. The human cost of the war in Ukraine has been devastating, but the prospect of one day rebuilding after the war gives hope to many Ukrainians. But the task will be monumental. So much has been destroyed and the economy is in ruins. An initial estimate by the Ministry of Economy of Ukraine shows that the Ukrainian economy shrank by 30% in 2022. Inflation hit a peak in October at 26.6% and has been persistently high for months. Despite the ongoing attacks from Russia, Ukraine is already looking towards the cost of rebuilding. Projections from the government, European Commission, and World Bank jointly estimate that that bill could be nearly $350 billion. For more on the economic costs of the war, I'm joined by Maxim Timchenko. He's the CEO of DTEK. That's the largest private investor in the energy industry in Ukraine. Welcome. Now, blackouts have become a fact of life in Ukraine since the war. Can you describe to us the state of Ukraine's grid infrastructure at the moment?
So one year ago, we started our war, energy war, and the DTEK is in the front line of this war. You know that Putin and Russians has been defeated on military front line, and they started physical destruction of infrastructure, especially from 10th of October when we experienced the massive missiles and drones attack. Since that time, we lost about 50% of our generation capacity. In some regions, we have devastating destruction of our power grid, but we are fighting. And I think it's a good example, Kyiv region, when it was liberated in April last year, we managed to restore power supply in 45 days. Today, we don't have blackouts at the extent we had three months ago. Of course, we need billions of dollars of investments into power grid at the moment. But what is the most important for us, the people with light and heat today at this moment.
Perhaps you can give us an indication. How difficult is it to ensure that these systems come back online?
It was quite difficult. On 23rd of November, we had so-called national blackout when most of our generation was switched off because of protection software after attack, and we managed to bring back the whole system in 24 hours. So it's not easy, but if we work as a team, thermal generation, nuclear, hydro, and we work all together, so we know how to bring it back. Of course, we paid very high price for that, and talking about us, we lost 141 employees. This is highest possible price so that people have electricity at the moment.
What's it like to work under these attack conditions?
I would say that this is indication of heroism of all people, civilians, our power engineers. So they go to power station knowing that this power station is the target of Russian missiles. So this is heroism, and I think that people just do their work, and basically the mission of our company is to bring light and warmth to people. This is everyday job for all of us.
Providing light and warmth. Maxim Timchenko, CEO of DTEK, the largest private investor in the energy industry in Ukraine. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
From looking at Ukraine's economy, we turn to Russia's. Over the past year, the Russian economy has languished under ramped-up international sanctions and is in the process of losing its trading partners in the West. But has the attack on Russia's finances been having the desired effect? on Vladimir Putin's ability to wage war? We've been trying to find out.
More than 30 countries have imposed sanctions against Russia in the year since it invaded Ukraine, blocking financial transactions, halting crucial exports, and substantially reducing energy imports. The impact to Russia's economy has been colossal. Exactly how colossal is difficult to tell. Russia says its economy shrank last year by just 2.1%, and the IMF believes its economy will grow further this year by 0.3%. But those figures may not be reliable, as they're based on shaky data out of Russia.
The heads of the IMF and the World Bank won't tell you this, but they have no idea what Russia's actual imports and exports are. Why? Because by Q2 of 22, they stopped reporting it. We don't know about foreign direct investment. We don't know about any of the metrics that are required to be a participant in the IMF and the World Bank. All they're getting is invented numbers.
President Putin has used the growth figures to try and bolster his support and dismiss sanctions.
The Russian economy turned out to be much stronger than the West had thought. Thanks to the joint work of the government, parliament, the Bank of Russia, the regional governments, and of course the business community and labor communities, we ensured the stability of the economic situation, protected citizens, saved jobs, prevented market shortages, and propped up the financial system.
Numerous companies have left Russia since the start of the war, pledging to pull away from the country even if it affects their bottom line. Brands like McDonald's, Starbucks, and others have exited Russia completely. But Professor Sonnenfeld's Yale team has also tracked over 240 companies who are digging in, so to speak, and maintaining full operations in Russia. Among them, Germany's Siemens Healthineers and Air China. He says this is one example where shutting down operations came with financial rewards.
For example, Royal Dutch Shell or BP or Exxon, they shut down completely and immediately, and BP wrote down $9 billion right away. And what happened? They're rewarded enormously, almost 2.5 times over in the financial markets. So it turned out not costing them anything. You don't look at an investment in terms of what it costs. You take a look at what the return is, and the return dwarfs whatever they invested in their corporate character and their reputation. It's hard to do business in Russia right now. It's not a smart place to be.
After 1 year of war, Russia's economy may not be as resilient as the government claims.
And that's it from DW Business. For now, it's back to my colleague Pablo for your news.
Thanks, Janelle. Well, immediate, complete and unconditional withdrawal from the territory of Ukraine. That's what the world demands from Russia, and that's the wording of a resolution that was passed resoundingly by the United Nations General Assembly. The UN took the rare step of calling an emergency special session to vote on the 10-point plan to end the fighting, just ahead of the first anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Draft resolution A/ES11/L7 is adopted.
A message to Moscow from the majority of the world's nations. Cease hostilities with Ukraine and withdraw your military immediately. The resolution, drafted by Ukraine, was passed by 141 of the UN's 192 member nations on the eve of the war's one-year anniversary. The result is non-binding, but it shows the wide support Ukraine has around the world.
We are satisfied with the outcome, and the message is clear. It doesn't matter what Russia tries and how it attempts to undermine international order and the coalition in support of Ukraine's territorial integrity. It fails one time after another.
Only 6 nations joined Russia in voting against the resolution, which also calls for investigations into serious crimes committed in the course of the war. Russia's ambassador had little comment. He called the resolution useless on Twitter and said it would only prolong the, quote, Ukrainian tragedy. China, whose foreign minister pledged a deeper partnership with Russia just a day before the vote, abstained, along with 31 other countries. Beijing's ambassador said his country supports the territorial integrity of all nations, but opposes arming Ukraine. The stance drew criticism from several of Kyiv's allies, including Berlin.
I've heard also today some of you who said that by arming Ukraine, we are adding fuel to the fire. But the truth is, if Russia stops fighting, this war ends. If Ukraine stops fighting, Ukraine ends.
Binding or not, the resolution is a sign of Russia's isolation 1 year into its war on its neighbor. But Moscow hasn't given any indication that it's willing to stop.
All right, let's speak now to Nicole Renvert. She's a political scientist specialising in foreign and defence policy and is also a fellow at the German Council on Foreign Relations. Welcome to DW. So the UN resolution calling for Russia to leave Ukraine is not legally binding. So really, what is the significance of this vote then?
Well, it's a very strong signal that the support for Ukraine hasn't changed in a year. While the expectation was that the war will end pretty soon and Russia will overrun Ukraine, we see that a year later, Russia still gets the support of the majority of the UN members. And what's interesting in this vote is that some member countries, for example, Brazil, joined the support and was outspoken, and so was Turkey and Saudi Arabia. So countries where you weren't sure how they will vote. So it's a very strong sign, and it's more than just a symbol.
So are we saying then that the support for Ukraine is growing somewhat, or is support for Russia growing? How do you see it?
The support, when you just look at the votes, is pretty similar to what we saw about a year ago. So people are not tired in supporting Ukraine, and also support the idea of a peace negotiation at some point. But right now, the support to further strengthen Ukraine is very strong, and this is an important sign against Russia.
Now, China abstained, as it's done in the past, and in the hours after the resolution was passed, Beijing released a much-anticipated 12-point peace proposal to end the fighting in Ukraine. So, can you tell me what your reaction to that plan is?
Well, already at the Munich Security Conference, there were rumors about the Chinese plan, and I felt that there's a little bit of a disappointment now because there's nothing new in the plan, and it's not concrete enough, and it's something that is not very useful now to move into the right directions, because it basically repeats things we all heard China saying before. Interesting is the fact that China didn't join the countries which support Ukraine in the UN resolution, and at the same time presents itself as an honest broker between the conflict parties. So China's position is still one that doesn't really support Ukraine wholeheartedly and stands with Russia.
Nicole Renvert from the German Council on Foreign Relations, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, throughout Russia's war of aggression, President Vladimir Putin has also attacked Ukraine's identity and its culture. So how can Ukraine's sense of itself survive this war? In our next report, we meet Ukrainian artists who, whether inside their country or in exile, all see culture as a means of survival and an anchor that can hold the nation together.
Alyona, the Ukraine's best-known rapper and style icon, in the studio of TV channel 1+1. She taught herself how to rap, and nowadays she speaks for an entire generation. Her subjects, the war and the feelings it unleashes. Since the start of the war, Alyona has been splitting her time between Kyiv and abroad. She sings about her experiences, and Europe is listening.
In all European stages, I see more of Ukrainian artists. Art always help to have connection with other countries, to understand us, to know something new about us, and see that we are creative.
With her music and on social media, the rapper takes on Putin. Belief also plays an ever bigger role in her music. Rap, a kind of prayer to protect her from fear.
Ти над нами все чуєш і бачиш, як вогнем вкрилось мирне небо, як в підвалі дитя тихо плаче. Всемогутній наш Господи, добрий.
Stay or go. Many musicians and artists battle with this decision. He decided to stay. Sviatoslav Vakarchuk, pop star, national hero, lead singer of Okean Elzy, the Ukrainian cult band. When the Russian invasion began, he literally took to the streets. Vakarchuk began performing among the ruins. He often travels to the front line to experience the war close up. Nevertheless, he keeps on going with his music.
Actually, this year, I mean, this is the year of music for me. Although how unusual it sounds for people, but I do a lot of music. We did 175 performances in the front line. We did probably 50 or 60 concerts in Europe and other countries already, more to come.
The war has also made many Ukrainian artists more determined than ever to fight the war with the means at their disposal and to ensure that art and culture doesn't fall victim to this conflict.
Well, DW correspondents have been on the ground in Ukraine from the first day of Russia's invasion. And here, Matthias Bullinger, Fanny Fashar and Nick Conley share what they experienced on that fateful day in February last year.
When the war started, I was in Slavyansk, in eastern Ukraine, in the Donbas region, and I knew that the war started because my phone rang. We were supposed to swap. I had been working there for a week, and my colleague Nick was coming to replace me, and I was going to take a train back to Kiev that day, but he called me from his train and told me that the war had started, and then we decided that he would get off the train and we would go and pick him up. We drove then to Kiev by car. It took us quite long because we tried to take some more secure routes, some smaller roads, and drove through the country. Where we drove, the war was a little bit far. We could sometimes hear something very distant, but we were not in the zone where fighting was going on. We were quite far from there. We saw people standing, queuing up for money at ATMs, for petrol, at petrol stations, and everybody was worried, had worried looks. People were talking about what was going on, and nobody knew what was going to happen next.
February 24 started for me while I was still asleep right here in this hotel. I remember a loud bang, and by the time I realized this was an explosion, it had been followed by another one. I was confused. I remember asking myself, what's next? With one hand, I was trying to pack up a few essentials. With the other one, I was busy on the phone with my colleagues in the newsroom trying to figure out what to do. I remember being on air for hours and just reporting what I saw unfold here right at Maidan. People scared, trying to leave the capital, Ukrainian military vehicles rolling through the city, the first checkpoints being set up. My cameraman and I, we were just trying to do our best, hold it all together and do our jobs. But of course, this question rang in our heads as well. Is it safe to stay in Kyiv or should we leave? It was the longest day I remember, full of uncertainty, that slowly turned into this ultimate realization: Russia's war had begun.
When the war began, I was sitting in a train heading east from Kiev to the Donbass for a reporting assignment. And I remember getting on that train with pretty mixed feelings. There was a real sense that the Russian state TV propaganda line was getting more aggressive, that after lots of false starts, this might really be the real thing. But everyone else on that train was just demonstratively relaxed. They were convinced this was just politicking, a bit of grandstanding, that nothing would actually happen. I remember not being able to sleep, just kind of glued to my phone. And then in the early hours, there was that push notification that Putin had given a speech, the Russian troops were crossing the border. And just as I started making sense of all that, the internet connection broke off. And for about 10, 15 minutes at a time, I just had no further information, no ability to contact anyone to find out if this was really true. And this happened a couple of times. And eventually we started hearing bangs. What later turned out to be an attack on a Ukrainian aerodrome we happened to be passing. And I went to the conductor of the train. I said, I want to get off. I don't want to go further east. I don't want to go closer to these Russian troops. And she didn't get it. She just couldn't process it. She couldn't accept that this was a genuinely dangerous situation. I was the only one who got off at that station, and it was still before dawn. But immediately people had, got in line in front of petrol stations, in front of supermarkets, in front of banks. They were shocked. They were dazed that this was something bigger. This wasn't just in Donbass, but they weren't panicking. That was the kind of extraordinary thing. The national anthem was playing on the tannoys in the town. People were making preparations, but they weren't panicking.
All right, well, that's all for now. Up next, a documentary, Children of War, Ukraine's youngest victims. 2/3 of the country's children are reportedly refugees, and many have experienced the loss of loved ones, separation from family members, the destruction of their homes, fear, or the move to a foreign country. The film focuses on the children of Odessa, Kharkiv, Bucha, and Lviv. I'm Pablo Folilias. For me and the team here in Berlin, thanks for watching. Take care, and I'll see you very soon.
It's a hot summer's day in the German city of Dresden. A huge fun fair offers lots of fun for kids. 7-year-old Alyssa from Kyiv has come with her mother. But the two of them are not here on a fun holiday. They're refugees who fled a brutal war in which they both almost died. The war raging back home in Ukraine is far away, and yet always there, in their thoughts, in their memories, in their emotions.
When I think about Ukraine, then I remember how my daddy was shot. Then I'm afraid. And even here, if we drive fast, I remember my last car drive with my daddy. We drove really fast so the tank wouldn't hit us. But it hit us anyway.
Alyssa and her mother now live in a small